Sup, bitches?
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. That's right, Tales from the fucking Drive-Thru. Been a while since I've done one of these, hasn't it? In today's tale, I'm going to talk about a couple of things from my current job. As you guys know, I'm currently a supervisor at a warehouse. I've worked at this warehouse for around 5 or 6 years now, and I've been a supervisor for around 2 years. I have in the past told the story about the manager who used to work there that killed his wife. That's in the episode Murderous Manager. Check it out if you haven't already. But today I'm going to talk about the driver from hell, as I like to call him. Because as working in a warehouse where we ship freight, I constantly have to deal with drivers going to the other facilities and taking our loads. But a lot of these drivers meet point drivers at a halfway point between where they're going. So we have a run that goes to Vegas, a run that goes to Reno, a run that goes to Denver, and so on. The Reno driver in particular is the one I'll be talking about. Now, the driver that I meet on my end is no problem. I've never had any issues with him. I've had multiple drivers on my end, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, with the Reno drivers, I've had some that have been great, some that have been kind of frustrating. As far as the ones on my end, like I said, we will get to the one on the Reno end that meets at the halfway point. But before we get to him, I'll talk about some of the other drivers I've had. We had one that was always particular in trying to tell me how to load the trailers. It was really frustrating because he seemed to not understand the fact that there is a particular way the company has me load trailers. They have me load in what they call brick load, which is the freight stacked in sort of a Tetris style, right? Back, left to right, up to the top. And then we have pallets that we load in after that. He seemed to think that I could decide when to load in those pallets and stuff, which is simply not the case. Regardless, I found ways to work with it most of the time, but essentially, when you're pulling a triple set of trailers, the back one is always going to sway a little bit. That's just the way it is. This driver also didn't like using the scales to weigh the trailers. He preferred to try and say, it's all about where the weight is distributed between the trailers, rather than the actual weight of the trailers themselves, which, by the way, the standard we go on is weighing them, although at the time that wasn't necessarily the case because there were issues with the scales back then. We weigh them all now. Whenever we do a triple set, that is a requirement. But that was the first Reno driver I had. He was an okay guy, but very picky and liked to complain a lot. After he left, I got another driver who told me about the meet point driver being a pain in the ass and being very particular with the way he wanted the forms filled out. He also complained a lot about the other drivers being late and stuff, even when it wasn't their fault. Like, even when it was an issue on the part of my facility, he would bitch at the other driver for being late and also throw a fit. The first driver that I had, one other thing I neglected to mention, there was a time when the highway was busy, so he literally just told all the other drivers to just wait and not leave yet, which obviously pissed off management at my warehouse. But anyway, back to the meet point driver, right? This guy, every driver he has dealt with has had trouble with him. He yells at them, he's a total dick, he'll constantly say he'll refuse to take the set, things like that. Total fucking drama queen. So, he scared off the first replacement driver that I had heard talking about how awful he was. He scared him off, made him quit. Then there was another driver I had temporarily who would actually later come back, but that other driver was just there to fill in the spot until they got a more permanent one for that run. Well, the more permanent one actually lasted for quite some time, well over a year, and so far he's the only one that seemed to be able to tolerate dealing with the other guy. Despite the fact that he could deal with him, he constantly told me how terrible he was. Eventually that driver left, and then I got another one that lasted for a few months, who did fine because we were doing double sets for a while. But as soon as we started doing triple sets again, the complaints started coming in from the meet point driver. This new driver kept claiming he was able to handle it and it was fine, and he kept saying how, oh yeah, I'm starting to get the hang of this other driver and deal with him. Which, by the way, this other driver constantly tries to tell us to do things with his sets that are actually illegal to do, like sending 2 long dollies with his set. You can't have 2 long dollies with a triple set. It makes it too long to legally go on the road. So he constantly would do things like that. And it started to drive this new driver insane, even though he claimed he could handle it. But then one night, he just up and quit and never came back. And so ever since then, I've been having to have one of the higher-ups of that trucking company actually do the deliveries. Like, we don't have the drivers, we have one of their higher-ups doing the driving. So that's been really frustrating. I mean, granted, it's been fine for me because it doesn't really affect me, but I can't imagine how irritating that is on the guy who's having to fill in right now, because he's not a driver typically. Like, he's trained to drive, he's driven, but he's supposed to be there running the company. So he's getting fucked over because of this one asshole in Reno who scares off all my other drivers. But that's really it for the driver from hell. It might not be the most interesting story, but I decided to tell it here. Now we're going to move on to something a little bit more fun, the phantom shitter. So, this also has to do with truckers. If you guys don't know, truckers can be kind of gross sometimes. Pissing in bottles and just setting it in the parking lot. I've talked to people who are truckers that have told me this, how if they'll piss in a cup and they'll just set it next to their truck. They don't want to throw it, they don't want to arouse suspicion, but they gently set it on the ground after they piss in a bottle. It's one thing that you're pissing in a bottle, but it's another thing that you're just leaving it in fucking parking lots, right? I have seen these piss bottles left in the parking lots at my warehouse in the past. It is not pleasant. But this takes it to a whole other level. This is what we like to call the phantom shitter. Now, there was a good, month where there just kept being feces found near the warehouse. And eventually we found out it was one of the drivers that was doing it. There's not really much more to it than that, but it is still worth mentioning because it's fucking gross. Just popping a squat in the middle of a fucking parking lot. Like, who does that? The next thing I'll bring up is we've actually had plenty of temps come in to the warehouse that were clearly, crackheads or meth heads or whatever. Because we've had all these fucking tweakers come into the warehouse, we did actually find some fucking syringes and spoons in the garbage can in one of the bathrooms. We don't really use temps anymore, so that hasn't been a problem in a while. Again, a lot of small little tales here, mostly about the driver from hell, but the phantom shitter and the crackhead temps are interesting enough as it is as well. But I think that does it for this episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. I hope you've enjoyed. Have a good one. Toodles.
Fuck it. We've come this far.